Welcome to today Coffee and Consulting about the topic Beyond Borders, a short guide to successful employment for cross-border commuters. My name is Friederike and I have the honor to guide you through the next 30 minutes. Before we start, there are some housekeeping rules. One is all of you are on unmute. In case you do have any questions about the topic, please use the chat box for questions to put down your questions. Any questions we can get during the presentation, we will directly answer after I've gone through a couple of slides and some guidance in that topic. Also on the right-hand side, you will find the slides from today's presentation, which you can download for you. In addition, it will be recorded today, and you can also then listen to it later on the YouTube channel. Today's topic is cross-border commuters, and that is at least looking at our daily practice, one of the major topics we have, because there are still several things quite unclear or not that clear as on the first glance it looks like. And therefore we also thought that today would be a good topic for today's Coffee on Consulting. So what are we looking at in the next couple of minutes? Here is basically the list, and that is basically also the short guide for successful employment for cross-border commuters. This list of 10 points is what you need to look at least when you either hire a cross-border commuter or you have one and you need to analyze or assess the situation. And also maybe there is a practical point from our side. It's good to review it really on an annual basis, because also things like the work schedule and where somebody is working can change, so that you have enough time to assess the situation anew and then also take the necessary actions. What are the major topics or the things you definitely have to look at? One is, for any cross-border commuter, you would have to look at the work permit requirements. And we will look at that in one of the next slides about what type of permit or what type of work authorization you would need in Switzerland. Now, what is valid now when we look today from a Swiss perspective at it, you would also have to look at the same thing if you have a cross-border commuter for another country. So one topic is the work permit topic. And looking at today's situation of cross-border worker, they not necessarily only work in the new work location or in the location their employer is situated. Some of them, at least a day or a couple of days, work as well from home. And therefore also you would have to look at the permit or the authorization they have, whether they are allowed to work from home without any problem, or whether you maybe would need to do there anything. So you have to basically look at both sides at both countries. Usually what you do if you hire someone, also if it's just a cross-border commuter, you would issue him a kind of normal standard Swiss contract. Now, if you use the standard contract for the cross-border commuter, that might put you in a bit of a difficult position, because a couple of things might not be ruled or regulated the same way as for someone living and working in Switzerland. Therefore, you can use the standard contract. However, you need to look in regard to taxation and social security, as well as be aware, even if you put down in the contract that Swiss law should be applicable, that there might be the situation that in case you terminate the contract or the employee is terminating it, you may end up in also having to consider the labor law from the country the employee is living. So therefore, be careful in case, at least from your end, you terminate the contract, that you make sure you know as well the risk, as well as what needs to be done and the right measurements from the country the employee is living in. Because basically, from a labor law perspective, the Swiss law is still, I would say, compared to our neighboring countries, still more a bit in favor of the employer, whereas the others have the protection of the employee a little more in their focus. Social Security, I just mentioned it. That I think is, at least from my perspective, the major part where you need to be very careful and need to take care that you have the right coverage and the employee enrolled in the right Social Security system. And that is also the reason that I think it is very good to review those cases on an annual basis to see whether there had been any changes, and therefore the Social Security coverage as it is needs to be adjusted. For a normal cross-border employee, there's that possibility of exemption from Swiss health insurance. Otherwise, if you don't use the exemption from Swiss health insurance, then any cross-border employee might be subject to Swiss health insurance as long as the employee is subject to Swiss Social Security. And that is, at least when I look at our cases from the practice, that is something at least German nationals rather like to keep their German health insurance instead of being covered in the Swiss health insurance. Also, if you have already looked at the premiums cross-border employees have to pay for health insurance, the premiums are much higher than the usual one you would pay in case you would be living in Switzerland. Therefore, also from a financial point of view, that is something which might be not in favor of the health insurance. The request of the A1, depending on which social security system somebody is then enrolled in, always makes sense, so that if someone wants to work from home as well, that there is the documentation ready for that. Review of the tax situation. That is something where we will look in a second as well to it. Depending also there on the number of days somebody is working from home, there might be changes, as well as on the country somebody is residing in. There are a couple of different tax rules applied. Also, we had the situation last year that there was a change in regard to cross-border workers from France, which now there are two different rules applying, as well as from the Italian side, from Italy, there are different rules applying. So there's not just one rule for any cross-border commuter in Switzerland. It depends on the country somebody is residing, which rule needs to be applied. And as said, the annual review I already mentioned is something we recommend for any cross-border commuters, because during the year things can change. Last bit is In case the employee has the possibility or is allowed to work from home, then we suggest usually that you should receive or should get an annual confirmation from the employee of how many days he had been working from home, either just from home or more broadly working in his residence country. And we come to, on another slide, I will get back to that matter, why the number of days in the home country are important. The topic is quite important, and there you see it on the slide, where you will find usually the cross-border commuters or the majority of the cross-border commuters. And there you see that on the borders, they are if it's dark red or dark orange, better to say, they're even above 50% is the proportion of foreign cross-border commuters in employment. So that is quite something. Therefore, as well, I mean, Zurich might be not now there that much in focus, but Basel, Geneva, Vaud, Ticino, they are really the cantons basically where the majority of cross-border employees are in. When we look at cross-border commuters, and we already tackled the different topics in that area, we need to be careful because each legal aspect has a bit of a different way what in their sense is a cross-border commuter. From a tax point of view, we do know two types of cross-border commuters. One is the one who is commuting on a daily basis. So, for example, living in Germany, working in Basel, and he's commuting on a daily basis. Then that is, from a tax perspective, a real cross-border commuter. And that is independent on the country the employee is residing from. And you will see on one of the next slides why that makes a difference, whether someone is a real cross-border commuter or what we call an unreal one. That is someone who is not commuting on a daily basis, but maybe just once a week. Because we have the possibility based on law for EU EFTA nationals working in Switzerland as a cross-border commuter, they can, or they only have to actually return to their home once a week. So basically someone can enter Switzerland on Monday, stay until Friday, and then go back, return home on Friday evening. That would be what we call from a tax point of view an unreal cross-border commuter. Or you could also put the phrase international weekly resident. So both would work in the same way. You will see on one of the next slides when we tackle the topic taxes, there are different rules from a tax point of view. I already mentioned that with Geneva and Italy, we do have different rules now applying. They are just came up last, or were implemented last year. Social Security wise, we understand a cross-border worker or cross-border commuter is someone who is residing in one country and actually working in a different country and being employed in that different country as well. And based on that, we do have the idea that someone is always subject to Social Security in the country he is employed. However, there are a couple of different regulations in case somebody is also working from home. The health insurance part I already mentioned, but we will come to that in a second. Immigration-wise, from an immigration point of view, usually we also talk, when we talk about a cross-border commuter, that is someone who is actually on a daily basis going back and forth. Now, there is a possibility that also from an immigration perspective, if the employee is an EU-EFTA national and coming from or residing in an EU-EFTA member state, then also there they only have to actually return back home once a week. And maybe in regard to income tax, if I come back to that, you may have heard or seen there are, depending on the country they are residing, a couple of days someone can reside in the country without changing the category of real cross-border commuters. We have with Switzerland the 60 days, with other countries 45 days or 50 days. So that is something you have to keep in mind. Now, we will not go in all the details about the different aspects, but I just would like to raise a couple of points regarding cross-border permits for EU-EFTA nationals. Usually, if you apply for a cross-border commuter permit, then that is with the letter G. As said, usually we will view or a cross-border person is someone commuting on a daily basis, and therefore the G permit is absolutely the right thing. Now, in case somebody is not actually commuting on a daily basis, but he might just have to come a couple of days during the week, and the rest of the week he will work from home. So maybe just twice a week is going to the office and the rest from home. Then he's only traveling or commuting on those 2 days on a daily basis. Then that still would be the G permit. In case now the individual will actually stay in Switzerland during the week and just return home on the weekend, then depending a bit on the canton the employee is living, he might or she might have to, or not she might, she has to register or he has to register with the local authority, because if someone is living during the week in Switzerland, then that also triggers the registration aspect. Based on the registration and depending on the canton or commune someone is living, either the G permit will be actually changed to a B permit, because cantons then have the possibility to impose a B permit as well. In case that's not the situation, someone could also keep the G permit. So that is something where you might have different solutions or you see different setups from different cantons. If you have a G permit, then that basically would also allow you to get exempted from the Swiss health insurance. So that is something which is kind of linked to the G permit. For EU-EFTA nationals, the procedure is quite quickly done and easy. It's just you file the application with the migration authority, and then usually within 1 to 4 weeks you will get a letter that someone has to do the biometric data appointment, and then afterwards it takes another 2 to 3 weeks until you would get your permit card. Now, there are cantons where that takes much longer, and you can imagine that the cantons where there is a huge number of cross-border commuters, there are longer periods until you get that permit. And that is Basel. That usually takes about 3 to 4 months to get it done, as well as Geneva or Canton Vaud, where it also takes 3 to even 6 months. The same thing applies to Ticino. One point in regard to non-EU EFTA nationals. So in case you do have a non-EU EFTA national and he or she is living at the border zone and would like to also get a cross-border permit, then you can do that. But there are a couple of things you have to look at. One thing is that the individual has to reside in the cross-border zone, and that is a certain zone indicated by the immigration authority. So that is not something you can just see, oh, that is within 5 kilometers from the border zone or 10 kilometers, and therefore that is the border zone. That's not. It depends also on each canton might have a different border zone as well. Therefore, that information you can find with the cantonal migration authority. They can provide you with the information what kind of communes on the other border side are belonging to that border zone. So someone has to live in that border zone for at least 6 months before you can apply for that G permit. Now, all the different aspects, like you have to prove that you haven't found anybody else in Switzerland or in the EU after. So the job search is just the same you would have to do even if someone would actually move to Switzerland and be hired locally. So the same rules apply. Also in regard to wage and working conditions, as well as the personal requirements that someone has to be a specialist in order to qualify for that. The only thing which has not to be reviewed is whether there is a quota available or not. But the rest of it, the same thing applies. So there you may want to see whether that individual not really would like to actually take up residence as well in Switzerland, and therefore then also can benefit from the lower taxation. Otherwise, the procedure is the same as you would hire any other non-EU EFTA national in Switzerland. Social Security, as at is, according to, or based on my opinion at least, the major topic for cross-border permits, cross-border commuters. I said already the general rule is that the Social Security liability is at the country of employment. Now there are special regulations and we will look at one just in a second. The two special regulations you would have to consider is the 25% rule as well as the 50% rule. The 25% rule, I think we all quite know how it works. It's basically if someone wants to work from home, he can work in his residence country of up to 25%. If it's below that, then still the Social Security liability applies from the country he's employed with. If it's above 25%, then actually the Social Security liability will switch or has to switch to the country of residence. Usually what we see is as soon as you tell the employee what the consequence will be if someone is working more from home, the Swiss system has a huge factor why someone would like to keep the Swiss Social Security, and that is the pension fund, as well as that compared to our neighboring country, there are more benefits someone has or gets out of the system as from the neighboring countries. So that is something where we see in practice that if you tell someone if he wants to work more from home, then that is fine. But the consequence would be that he will be kicked out from the Swiss Social Security system and then also lose the pension fund, also the employer contributions to it, because then the employee is then completely subject to the social security from the country of residence. Now, that is one aspect. From an employer perspective, I think I try to keep the employees whenever possible in the social security system from the country of employment, because that is the one I know the best. I know exactly how it works in case somebody gets for a longer period sick or has an accident, because then the rule of the home social security system will apply. In case somebody will in the end switch to the social security liability from the country they reside, there are different rules, and then in the end you will have to make sure you know them as well for getting everybody secured correctly. When last year the teleworking regulation had been implemented with those 50%, we all thought, oh wow, that's great, because there had been lots of people really wanting to work from home, and as an employer you were struggling because you had to kind of have different rules for home office possibilities for cross-border commuters compared to the one living in Switzerland. Mostly because of the social security aspect, because then you would have to consider a different social security system, which is not that easy if you look at it in a whole. However, the 50% rule is also not really, at least not really what I expected, because in the end you have to be very, very careful what your employee is doing at home. We have on that slide, on the next slide, we actually put together the major parts and comparison between the 25% rule compared to the 50% rule. Basically, the 50% rule was meant for just people or just employees who just work from home. And if somebody is just working from home, nowhere else, so basically in Switzerland or from home in, if we say Germany, then he can work up to 49.99% in Germany without the risk that he would actually have to switch to the German Social Security liability. However, in case he would actually work in a different country, or also maybe in Germany he would meet clients or go to the affiliated company in Germany, then the 50% rule cannot be applied anymore. You would have to switch to the 25% rule and have to look at that someone can only work for up to 25% in total. The other thing is that new regulation, not all the countries have actually already signed that off. The 25% rule is for all EU EFTA member states according to the agreements we have in place. Whereas that new 50% regulation, they are not all countries who have signed it. They can still sign it, and as soon as they have signed it, then also it will be implemented. So there you have to be a bit careful and have to look really at the correct situation. And because of the thing that you also have to consider the day somebody is working at an affiliated company or somewhere else. That's why I said you need to have that in the confirmation as well, so that you need to be sure, or you need to have the right facts to assess the situation, whether the 25% rule or 50% rule can be applied and can be looked at. In regard to taxes, I think that we can do now a bit quicker. Um, Basically, we have those different tax rates, and that should just give you a rough idea or rough where you can see where the differences are. And therefore, you can also think that cross-border commuters would like to have the taxation in Switzerland as anybody else, but also kind of benefit from living in their residence country where the cost of living at least is a little lower than in Switzerland. So it would be the perfect or the ideal world if you can actually benefit from both. Unfortunately, that's not that easy. We do have different regulations from a cross-border perspective. Those regulations you can find in the double tax treaty, as well as there are a couple of addendums to it. And there is between for Italy and France, we have now a bit of more complicated situation because there are different rules depending on when somebody is employed with or started the employment in place. And in France, it depends a bit on where the employment, where someone is living, as well as where somebody is working in Switzerland. There you have to look at it a bit closer. With Germany, I think it's still the easiest tax rule where, as a Swiss employer, I just have to deduct the 4.5% and I'm basically good. Whatever then has to be done in Germany, the employee will have to declare his income and pay the taxes in Germany, but that is something he has to do himself. Now, one thing which we should not forget in regard to cross-border commuters or international weekly commuters is that if somebody is working from home, you may have the risk regarding permanent establishment. We haven't looked at that today, but it's something you always have to keep in mind that depending a bit on the position as well and the competences someone has in the company, you may have to see whether you can reduce the days or the tasks someone is doing in their home country. Please keep that in mind. I already said a couple of words about international weekly commuters, or what we also call like unreal cross-border commuters. Now, if somebody has taken up residence in Switzerland, then clearly he will be viewed as a normal employee, still still working in Switzerland, but having still his main residence abroad. And therefore, you still have the topic with that category group of people that those people would like to work from home as well, independent whether they are living in Switzerland during the week or maybe just from Monday to Thursday and then going home and working on a Friday from home or whatever. But that is something you have to still look and be treat carefully. Now, because they take up residence, they are then automatically as well in their kind of tax register. Therefore, as an employer, you would have to deduct the normal withholding taxes. So the normal taxateurs tariff will apply for. But the consequence is that usually those people, even they get a tax return to be filled out, they might not can file a tax return or have to file a tax return. And there is that 90% rule which applies to. What we've seen is that employers advise very nicely that everybody should look at the pension fund, and that might be something to actually to reduce the tax liability which is true for someone living in Switzerland and who really can file a Swiss tax return. With that, you can deduct your taxes. However, those international weekly commuters, a lot of them cannot file a Swiss tax return, and therefore, in case they make an additional payment to the pension fund or make a payment to a Pillar 3A bank account or Pillar 3A in general, they can't deduct that in Switzerland, and usually they have also no benefit then in their home country. Therefore, I would recommend to tell those people they rather should maybe check with a tax expert on their situation to make sure that they not make an additional payment to Pillar 3A or pension fund, and in the end they can't really benefit from a tax perspective of it. With that, I also kind of close the presentation to that topic, and then I just would like to see whether there are any questions from your end. There is one question here. Would Kiara be considered an unreal cross-border commuter? No, I can't see it really. Unreal cross-border commuter since she is living and going to the Munich office only. So I have skipped that. That was one of the sample in the beginning. Let's go back. That's the sample. Chiara Baldi is an Italian national, lives in Munich. She works in Zurich for an insurance company. She can do her job also from home. Based on her job, she needs to go regularly also to their office in Munich. Chiara has received the approval that she can work 2 days from home. Now, in regard whether she is an unreal cross-border commuter, it's if I look at from a Swiss perspective to it, it depends on whether she is now commuting on a daily basis during those 3 days she is working in Switzerland. So if she is commuting every day, then she would be viewed as a real cross-border commuter. In case she is not, she is kind of coming on Monday to Zurich, staying here until Wednesday, and then on Wednesday she's going back. That would be then an unreal cross-border commuter. I hope that answers your question. And the next question, in your example, does Chiara have a German contract or from Switzerland? In that example, she would have a Swiss contract because she is, it's not clearly stated, but she works in Zurich for an insurance company. Therefore, I assume, or the idea was that she has a Swiss employment contract. And who has given the approval for work from home, the company or the employment agency? With her, she is employed with the insurance company, and that's where the employer has provided the approval that she actually can work in their office in Munich. So that is something each company can decide on its own whether they do want to approve that or not. I hope that answers the questions, and these are also the only two we received. In case you do have any other questions, then reach out to us. We're here for you, and we will then be happy to answer your questions afterwards by email. Before we close today's event, I just would like to draw your attention to our next webinar, which is about Business Traveler, which is on the 30th of April, and then our next seminar, which is on the 30th of March, where we go into the topic cross-border employees and international weekly commuters a lot more in detail, with also more best practice cases. However, it's in German held. With that, I would like to close today's Coffee and Consulting. I hope you enjoyed it and you maybe have received some more input for your daily work. If not, then I'm very sorry. And I hope that we will see us in one of our next events. Thank you very much for your attention.